Carroll County line. We're here at Indiana University Kokomo today to talk to you about an old Irish proverb. Something about looking behind you to see how far you've come. I can't remember what it was, but I'm sure it was very profound. But anyway, it's Black History Month, and as an Air Force veteran, I like to reflect on the heroes who helped integrate the service and bring a lot of people into my world that have become very important to me. My favorite was General Daniel Chappie James, who was a Tuskegee Airman. Never flew in combat during World War II, but during the Vietnam War, he was assigned to the 555th Tactical Fighter Wing at Udorn while they were flying combat operations over Vietnam. His commander was Colonel Robin Olds, and they became known as Batman and Robin. And one of their most famous operations was Operation Bolo, where they basically initiated a subterfuge and lured a bunch of communist MiG-21s into their targets so they could blast them out of the sky while they were escorting bombers into Vietnam. So General James is just one of many people who changed the face of the Air Force during my career there. And with us today to tell us about a very, very exciting exhibit that's coming to the Grissom Air Museum is Robin Williams. Hi, Robin.
Hi, how are you today?
Welcome back to IUK.
Oh, thank you. I'm an IU grad, so it's always great to be back in IU country.
What can you tell us about this exhibit?
The exhibit will be opening on Memorial Day. This is the second time that I've worked with an amazing woman, very dynamic historian, Zellie Orr. In 2015, we teamed up together. I was the director of the Aviation Museum in Atlanta, Georgia. And we had the good fortune of connecting with each other to create Nest of Eagles was the name of the exhibition. And that was at what is now known as the Emma Darnell Aviation Museum. So we were lucky because we had a lot of the DOTAs, the documented original Tuskegee Airmen, in residence there. We part of the Atlanta chapter. There were, I think, 8 of the DOTAs that were still alive at that time. So during the course of time that we put this together, we only had 2 weeks to put it together, actually. And it was supposed to be up for 6 months, and it stayed up for almost 7 years. So it was a great exhibit, a terrific backdrop for the history and the storytelling of the Tuskegee Airmen. And we're getting ready to do the very same thing here, bigger and better, in fact, under the auspices of the Howard County Memorial Corporation, with some help from our Community Foundation of Howard County.
Who were the Tuskegee Airmen, and what was their role in history?
Well, I think their role in history, the armed forces were not, it was the Army Air Corps, so there was no Air Force quite yet. But, in terms of, integrating the armed forces, this was a huge step towards that. I think one of our biggest champions really in that effort when Tuskegee Institute was the base for all of this learning and flying and creating this Tuskegee experiment. It was really just an experiment at first, right? But actually, during the flying exercises and training, Eleanor Roosevelt showed up. And she said, we heard that Negroes cannot fly. Mm-hmm. And on that day, Chief Anderson took her up in the plane for about 45 minutes, and she came out of the plane with smiles, saying, well, obviously this is not true. So I'm sure she went back to her husband and said, we need to do something to really elevate and get this going. And that was really how they had the first opportunity to go to Europe and support the pilots and the bombers. And in the course of that, we're able to, Charles, even from Indiana, Indiana has a rich history in this, but Charles B. Hall was the first African American to shoot down an enemy plane in World War II. So,
This is all very informative. This is all news to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Indiana has a footprint and an impact in this whole legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen. There were, I think, 28 that graduated from Tuskegee training.
Hoosiers,
yeah. That came from Indiana. Charles B. Hall again being the first. In this exhibit, we actually have the original newspaper clipping of Charles B. Hall shooting down that plane from the Brazil, Indiana Times.
Now, will that be on exhibit?
Yeah, of course.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So I've got all kinds of things, and my job as a curator is to not only collect all of these artifacts, but also to really visually tell the story of the airmen. There'll be people like yourself that'll come in and they'll want to know all the facts and all the figures and all the intricate details. And then there'll be people that just want to understand what was the impact and what was the legacy, what did it really mean. And when we titled this Tuskegee Airmen, America's Freedom Flyers, because I think it's a really great time to show that these guys were civil rights warriors before the civil rights movement. And so there were a lot of things that happened, during the course of their training. They had so many challenges to face and stepped up. And not only did they face those challenges, but they were really excellent in every aspect of what they learned as pilots, as people on the ground, because a lot of people don't even talk about the 14,000 that were involved in this Tuskegee experiment that ended up being very successful.
Of course, everybody, I hope, is acquainted with the slavery era, but I don't think a lot of young people today have an appreciation for the level of discrimination that existed, even in Indiana, as recently as World War II.
Well, it still exists.
Well, that's why I think this is.
I mean, let's be real about it. Yeah, it still exists, and there's still, like I would say, a lot of microaggressions that happen, even in today's history. So, when I run into people, for instance, when we look at, I'm just going to pick this up so you can see it. We look at the 5 Tuskegee Airmen that came from Indiana, from Kokomo, Indiana, and so these guys still have family here. They still have connections. They still have a legacy of connections. I just got a call actually the other day from Lieutenant Colonel Bennett Hardy's grandson, and he's in Virginia now because he's retired from the Air Force, and he inherited all of his granddaddy's stuff. So he's got his flight jacket, he's got all of the interviews, he's got the certificates, the diplomas, everything that he achieved during the time as he was training to be an airman. And then he was a career armed forces guy. So, you've got still people who remember these families and these men. And so, our goal is not only to just have this traveling exhibit that stays for a year and then leaves, but then we have now permission to create a mural downtown that would be a permanent addition to our community that really celebrates and elevates the legacy of these men. So that's exciting. Very
exciting. How's progress coming with fundraising for that project?
Well, I mean, fundraising is fundraising, so as vice president of the Howard County Memorial Corporation, we have really accomplished some great things in our organization. And, one of them, the latest in 2021, the Women's Memorial downtown, the Women's Legacy Memorial.
Sure.
There you will see 3 women, but one that really stands out to me is Shauna Rochelle Kimbrell, who was the first African-American fighter pilot for the Air Force. She also endured her own issues, and this was very recent compared to the Tuskegee Airmen story, but, she had to, she was a woman, she was a black woman, and this is something she said, I'm going to do this, and this is something I'm going to accomplish. So she didn't have an easy time of it, In fact, last week, the NFL, right before the Super Bowl, released a wonderful documentary called The Flyest Ever, and it's about the Tuskegee Airmen legacy, about a football player who went into the armed forces to become a pilot. And he was very much inspired by the Tuskegee Airmen, so he wanted to create something that would really speak to their legacy. And they talked about Chappie James, in fact. They talked about the Thunderbirds. And they featured the Thunderbirds at the end of the documentary. Ms. Zellie Orr, who's going to be here at IUK on the 26th, she was the featured historian in that exhibit, and not the exhibition, but the documentary. So she's very well regarded, and she's an amazing lady. I hope people will come to hear her. But she was part of this wonderful NFL documentary, as well as Shauna Rochelle Kimbrell. So we felt very excited that these two ladies, these two dynamic women, were the ones who were in that NFL documentary, the flyest ever. You can go on YouTube and catch it. So,
what can we expect to learn from their presentations?
Well, have you seen Red Tails?
Yes.
Okay, and what did you think about it?
I pretty much cast my review, I think, in my opening remarks. As a white guy who served in the Air Force during the 1970s, we didn't really see much in the way of discrimination. We worked alongside black people. We lived with them. We worshiped with them. They were really just part of our family. People were truly judged based on their character instead of their skin color. And I think what this movie told me, and I really feel deeply about it, is that I know what it is to be the first to something. Not because it happened to me.
Sure.
But my wife worked in law enforcement, and she got to ride on people's coattails. But it's difficult to step into a role where you may not be expected to perform at the same level as other people. And that's what these guys did. People told them they couldn't do it, and they did it anyway.
Well,
and
not only did they do it, but they did it in such a high level of excellence.
Oh my gosh!
Because the pressure was on, and I think as people of color, as women, we have all of those challenges to face. There's an immediate perception sometimes that we're not good enough to do the job. And so certainly, when we celebrate somebody like Shauna Rochelle Kimbrell, somebody like Zellie Orr, who has dedicated her life to really learning and upholding the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen, I love working with those kind of women.
I can.
Yeah. I mean, it's just really exciting because the expectation is we're not going to be able to step up to the challenge of even presenting the information. So we're going to do it, and we're going to do it with excellence. And certainly, we want to engage a very broad spectrum of people of all backgrounds, whether it's military or just regular folks who might remember these guys and still know some of their family. We want to make sure that we tell those stories of the hometown heroes. People are really responding to this because it's something that's very tangible. It's a story that they can really relate to. Like I said, they might even know some of the family. So it's really great to be able to go from the macro story, the larger story, down to our hometown and how are these guys, how are we going to represent them.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So when does the exhibit open at Grissom?
It opens on Memorial Day at 3 p.m., at our Veterans Memorial on Goyer Road, which we were a big part of, Howard County Memorial Corporation.
It's a wonderful, wonderful part of the city.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's really, I think, a treasure that more people should experience. There are people from all over the world that come and support that beautiful park. And so at 11 o'clock a.m., we will have our traditional Memorial Day service, if you want to call it that. And then at 3 p.m., people get a chance to go eat a little bit of lunch and then come over to the museum and enjoy and celebrate the opening of the exhibit. So we're really excited about that.
Great. And at Mrs. Orr's exhibit, what's going to happen there? What time? How much does it cost?
Well, it's really, it's Red Tails. And Red Tails, going back to Red Tails is kind of a fictionalized, romanticized love story, you know what I'm saying? But it engages people in wanting to know more about the real history of the Red Tail pilots And then when they come to our exhibit, they're going to see what were the roles of women, what were the roles of a very diverse cadre of people that supported the Tuskegee experiment. There were white folks, black folks, Haitian folks, people from all over the world that were involved in that. And so I think it's really interesting to see the diversity, see the women that were involved, really look at what were the roles of the ground crew. It's not just about these romanticized pilots. I'm sure Miss Orr will be talking about the real history, and that's why she's going to be there.
Good.
But it's February 26th on Monday here at IUK. It's sponsored by the IUK Black Student Center and Howard County Memorial Corporation, our organization.
Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
If I can just throw in a little sidebar, one of the fascinating things that I have learned about the Red Tails, not necessarily the Red Tails, but some of the airmen involved in the Tuskegee experiment, later in the war, because we'd lost so many white bomber pilots, there was a move to try and start transitioning some of the guys who'd already been trained to fly fighter planes to fly multi-engine aircraft. Well, the training base for that was at Freeman Field in Seymour, Indiana. And as soon as the base commander found out that he was getting a bunch of black students, he built a separate dining hall and officers club for them because he didn't want them associating with his white officers. And to get around, the Army was already trying to integrate. During World War II, typically a black soldier had to serve 4 years on active duty before he was considered competent enough to serve in combat, whereas a white soldier would usually go right into combat after he completed his training. Blacks were typically assigned menial jobs like truck driving and cooks. On the Navy was a little more better integrated. They used them as stewards and even gunners in some cases, but by and large, blacks were restricted from combat roles. And this story about Eleanor Roosevelt makes perfect sense because at Freeman Field, when these trainees came in to learn how to fly multi-engine airplanes and found out that they had to go to a separate officers club, they went to, which wasn't as nice as the white club, they went over to the white club and demanded entry, and somebody told them that they couldn't come in. Some senior officer ordered them to leave. Well, about 60 of them, I think, made it inside, and they were all brought up on charges under the Uniform Code of Military Justice for disobeying an order. The next day, the base commander issued an order and wanted everybody to sign it in acknowledgement that you cannot go into the White Officers Club, which they called the Instructors Club, to get around the integration rules, segregation rules.
It was the 477th Bombardment Group, by the way. And they had previously been in Kentucky and had similar issues, but by the time they made it to Seymour, Indiana, they pretty much had enough, and they weren't going to put up with it.
They were fed up.
Yeah, they were supposed to sign a letter that they would agree not to try to integrate, and they refused to sign, and that's where all these charges came up. What was it? Terry. His name was Terry. I don't have his first name here, but he refused, to do it, and so many of those charges were dropped over the years. But he had to wait until 1995 to have his charges dropped. So
that's right. Most of the charges, and we talked about this earlier, Robin, resulted from these guys just refusing to sign this acknowledgement that they wouldn't go into the club. That was disobeying an order, so they brought them up on charges. I think 103 of them, or 102.
It was over 100, yeah.
But it went all the way up to General George C. Marshall before he said, "This is nonsense." Dismissed charges against everybody but this one guy who either pushed or bumped into a senior officer on his way into or out of this club. And so his charge was just a little more serious, but even he was acquitted of that at a much later time.
This is in 1945, so imagine that this kind of a large demonstration in solidarity was definitely, I always call these guys the civil rights warriors before the civil rights movement. They really started creating a message there that, carried itself on into the civil rights movement.
I think that's a very apt description. Yeah, thank you.
And that's why we call them America's Freedom Flyers. They were, there's a quote from this wonderful documentary from the NFL last week that really stuck with me, and they said true leadership is really when you have the ability to stand up and speak truth to power. It's courage that's needed. And these guys were courageous, and they said, we're not going to stand for this.
They demonstrated themselves repeatedly in combat and proved themselves to be good leaders, brave, and had a lot of initiative. Then came home to face prejudice and racism. It just wasn't fair. And this example at Freeman Field, I think, is one of the points that got former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt's attention and President Truman when they lobbied for what later finally emerged from Congress as the Women's Armed Services Integration Act in 1945. That came out in June. It pissed the president off so much because he wanted blacks included in that, but Congress had sidestepped him and just opened the military up to women, that he issued an executive order the very next month and said, no, we're going to let blacks serve in every capacity, including leadership roles from now on. Now, it's not something that changed overnight, certainly.
No, but I mean, we see the reverberating effects of that with, B.O. Davis was the first to be at West Point, the first black to be at West Point. So, he carried that on, and again stood strong and was the commander of the Tuskegee Airmen. So, there were a lot of great things that happened, but it was never backing down from the challenge. Never backing down.
Right, I know you're right. And when I look at some of the people I served with, and the greatest example of people I knew directly was Chief Master Sergeant Thomas Barnes. He was the first black Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. And in that role, he was responsible for the welfare of every enlisted man in the active duty, reserves, and National Guard. And these were the post-Vietnam years when President Carter was in office. He was downsizing the military. I can't even tell you the many ways that Chief Barnes improved the life of enlisted people in the United States Air Force during his term. It was really remarkable what he was able to do at a time when budgets were just collapsing.
I think you're an advocate when you realize what it feels like to have to advocate.
Well put.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it's not just advocating because you have that very deep understanding. You have to advocate for yourself and really stand up against these kind of challenges. So you're going to advocate for others. You're going to try to be balanced and fair because you want to see that across the board.
That's a good point.
Not just for people of color, but for everyone who's involved. So I think that's that kind of exemplar that you're talking about with this gentleman Barnes. I think that was definitely an example. And then you see that, with B.O. Davis. B.O. Davis was the reason that the Thunderbirds were even instated, fully funded when he was standing there at the Pentagon in a role. I can't remember exactly what his role was at the Pentagon at the time. But he said, I'm going to advocate for this because this is a great way to promote the Air Force.
That alone is a great legacy because everybody loves loud jets, right?
Yeah. I wish we could have some for the opening of this thing. I think that would be great. We'd love to have some Thunderbirds or a flyover of some kind. So they'll put that bug in somebody's ear,
okay.
Right?
Yeah, we're here today. If anybody has a loud airplane they want to help with this.
But I understand that the jet fuel is quite expensive, so it would be something that they have to donate to us that day. I don't know that we would have it in our budget to do it, but it would be beautiful to have those loud jets flying over the opening of this particular exhibit. So.
Or even a P-51. Like the red tails flew. Yeah.
Well, we're gonna have a small P-51 in the exhibit. So when I say small, it's about 6 feet wide. It's created by a terrific artisan. His name is Willie Hintz, and he's out of Georgia. and he creates model planes that actually fly, but they're large-scale model planes. So we had this for the one in Georgia. I've always said we're getting the band back together, just like the Blues Brothers. I mean, it's me, Zellie, Willie Hintz, John Slemp, who's a tremendous photographer. We're going to be featuring some of his portraits of the airmen as they got older, because they came back in 2017 for a special visit in Atlanta. We've got the City Council proclamation of their official visit to Atlanta in 2017 as part of the exhibit. We've got the sign Tuskegee Airmen Parkway. So I've got all these things that we've collected from Atlanta and from all over the world that are going to be part of the exhibit. So that's really cool. But this plane, people were going to love it because McGee and all the guys signed this plane. So their signatures are on the plane itself. But it's down to the very grommet that you can see the details of this wonderful.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
I'm pumped. I'll be there.
Red tail plane. So it'll be in the very front of the exhibit, and people could take pictures with it and stuff. So that's cool. They'll enjoy that.
One more question.
Mm-hmm.
Having volunteered at a military history museum for a number of years, I found it difficult to stimulate young people, get them interested in history. What are young people going to get? What do you expect them to learn from these programs?
Well, number one, I think it's super important, and this is the reason we also raise money, okay? Because we want to make sure that every young person in this community has access to this exhibit. They might not be learning about this at school, okay? Let's just be honest about it. They might not be learning about this incredible history at school. They need to come to the exhibit. So we want to make sure that we have access to kids who may not have the money to get into the exhibit to learn all of this. We also want to use whatever educational curriculum I know that, in fact, part of the Red Tails movie, part of their initiative was to create a curriculum, which is available to teachers for them to integrate into their classrooms. We will make sure that all of those links and all of that information is available to our local educators. The other thing that I think will just be inspiring them is if they can go downtown during Strawberry Festival or some other time and walk up to this incredible mural that's going to be larger than life and see there were guys right here from our own backyard that were part of this legacy. Maybe I can be a pilot too. Maybe I can work on the plane. Maybe I can be part of this in some way. Maybe I can go into the Air Force, and that's another path for them. So quite frankly, I think it's a great recruiting tool for the Air Force.
Perfect. Robin, thanks for joining us and sharing this project with us. I'm tremendously excited, and I'll be there.
It's all about the love. It's all about the inspiration, and we hope to inspire a lot of people from all walks of life, all backgrounds, with this wonderful exhibit.
And thank you, too, for preserving these legacies, because without people like you, I'm afraid folks would forget over time.
Well, you can't forget. You can never forget. And, I don't know. This is the fourth Tuskegee Airmen project I've worked on, so I don't know why it's coming to me personally, but I'm just thrilled and very humbled by it.
Great. Thanks again, Robin.
Thank you so much.